I'm in the Clayton Museum of Ancient History on the campus of York College in York, Nebraska. And I'm in the room that has a number of printed, very old pages from the Bible. Right next to me, we have the Geneva Bible, which actually dates to 1599. Below that is the King James Version of the Bible, a page which dates from 1612. And back here we have a couple of Latin pages from the Bible, one from Erasmus' New Testament, which dates to 1549, and one from Jerome's Latin Vulgate, dating from 1512. Well, these are very old Bibles. And one of the things people often ask when you talk about the Bible is, you know, it's such an old book, it's probably full of mistakes and errors, and I'm not sure we can trust the Bible. So in this session, we want to deal with the reliability of the Bible. Has the Bible been reliably translated through the many years since it was written?
It might do us well to review some basic facts about the Bible as to when it was written, and some basic facts that will help us understand more about the Bible. First of all, the Bible is actually a collection of 66 books, and it is divided primarily into the Old Testament and to the New Testament. The Old Testament contains 39 books written from about 1500 BC to 500 BC. There are about 30 authors. It was written originally in Hebrew with a small section, a couple places in Aramaic. The arrangement of the Old Testament in the English Bible, there are 5 books of law to begin with, 12 books of history, 5 books of poetry, and 5 major prophets and 12 minor prophets. The Hebrew Bible is not organized the same way, but it has the same books. In the New Testament, we have 27 books written from about 50 to 100 AD by 8 different authors, written in the Greek language. The arrangement in the New Testament, there are 4 Gospels, 1 book of history called the Acts of the Apostles, and then 21 letters written by different authors to the various churches and individuals in the churches in the first century. And then lastly, the book of Revelation, a book of prophecy. In the timeline, we can see basically how the Old Testament was written over a 1,000-year period from the time of Moses. Most people think he had something to do with the writing of the first 5 books, all the way until the time of around 400 for the last book of the Old Testament. And then the New Testament was written from about 50 to 100 AD. These dates are approximations, but they are pretty precise, and for ease of memory, I've rounded off some of the numbers.
First of all, we want to look at some of the Old Testament manuscripts. As you know, the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, most likely from 1500 to around 400 BC. The oldest manuscripts we have, up until about 75 years ago, was this one fragment called the Nash Papyrus. This was found in Egypt in 1902 and is owned by Walter Nash. It has a small segment of Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy chapter 5 and 6. More recently, there was found a silver scroll dating back to 650 BC. This silver plaque and another silver plaque found next to it are the earliest known fragments of a biblical text, predating the oldest of the Dead Sea Scrolls by almost 400 years. It contains a part of Numbers, chapter 6, verse 24 through 26. Not much is on those small silver scrolls.
In 1947, there was a major manuscript discovery at Qumran. Qumran is on the northwest shore, about 1 mile from the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea at this point is about 1,300 feet below sea level. It's the lowest point on Earth. Here are some of the jars that manuscripts were found in at Qumran. We want to talk next and look a little bit at the community of Qumran. We're looking across a ravine at Cave 4. This is the cave where all Old Testament books are represented in some form. At first they said Esther was not in these scrolls, but apparently they have found a piece of Esther as well. These are the mountains behind Cave 4, and other caves were found that also have Bible manuscripts. You're looking down now at the Dead Sea, and as I mentioned, we're only about a mile from the Dead Sea here. We're looking south down the ridge where Cave 4 is located. Across the ravine to the east is the community of Qumran. We'll be looking at this and talking a little bit about what are some of the theories about who started Qumran and how long it lasted and its relationship to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Roland DeVoe in the early 1950s is the first to do a major excavation at Qumran. We see the water canal here and some of the cisterns. This water system provided water for the community, and many think for mikvahs or baptisms at the community as well.
There are a number of caves that housed documents that were found by a shepherd boy in 1947. This is a picture of Cave 4. In this cave, all Old Testament books except Esther have been found. And there are 3 complete copies of the book of Isaiah. These scrolls predate Jesus, perhaps by as much as 150 years. Altogether, 931 manuscripts were found in these caves. Up to 12 caves housed scrolls that were found. And these manuscripts date from 300 BC to 40 AD. And there were 220 scrolls of biblical text, 21 from the book of Isaiah. The Great Scroll of Isaiah is the only complete Old Testament book found in these scrolls. It dates to at least 125 BC. Now, up until this time, the oldest copies of the Bible of any substantial nature were from what we call the Textus Receptus, the received text. The Masoretes were Hebrew scholars who copied and recopied ancient Hebrew books. The Dead Sea Scrolls predate these because these scrolls from the Textus Receptus date to around 900 AD. So with the Dead Sea Scrolls, we find copies of the Old Testament more than 1,000 years before these Masoretic texts.
In May of 1976, I was privileged to visit my parents in Nazareth, Israel. He was the principal for the Alabun Christian High School in Nazareth, and my parents took us down to Qumran, and we got there early one day, and I was able to climb down into Cave 4. This was certainly one of my great blessings in life, to be in the cave where so many Bible manuscripts were found.
A man who has done a great deal of study about the text in the Dead Sea Scrolls is named F.F. Bruce. And on page 61 of his book entitled Second Thoughts on the Dead Sea Scrolls, he wrote, "The Jewish scribes of the early Christian centuries copied and recopied the text of the Hebrew Bible with the utmost fidelity. Between the Masoretic text of 900 AD and the Dead Sea Scrolls of at least 100 BC, there's less than 1% deviation in these texts. So the Bible has really been well preserved." Charles Pfeiffer, another biblical scholar, said, "Those who believe in an inspired Bible find much encouragement in the Qumran text." Now let's look briefly at manuscripts for the New Testament now. The New Testament would have been written approximately 50 to 100 AD, containing 27 what we call books. The importance of the early manuscripts for the New Testament is as follows. First of all, for their historical accuracy. They record various events in the life of Jesus or the Apostle Paul and his missionary journeys. And the closer to the actual events, the better likely the accuracy of their records. Secondly, it's very important to the whole scheme of Christianity that verification or falsification of the events recorded in these manuscripts be able to be had. In other words, they record much about the life of Jesus and then about the Apostle Paul. If any of these things were not true, there were thousands of people who could have read these manuscripts, which were widely disseminated quite early in the first century. Therefore, they provide a way so that legends and myths and falsehoods could not have developed. In addition, for the Christians, doctrinal clarity could be aided by finding out what the original Christians really believed. For the New Testaments, there are some very important Greek manuscripts. There are two types. First, what are called uncials, and there's over 300 of those. Secondly, there's the minuscules, and there's over 4,000 of these ancient Greek manuscripts. The uncials are all capital letters, and no punctuation, no space between words, and generally they are older than the minuscules. The minuscules are lowercase letters and more like handwriting. And they represent a very broad representation throughout the Mediterranean world, all over, so that we have different manuscripts from many different localities. Now, in recreating the New Testament text, there are three primary ways that we get an accurate record of the original writings. We don't have any original manuscripts of any of the New Testament documents, but we have some that are very early. Three ways. First of all, the actual manuscripts or copies of the originals. Secondly, we look at the versions or translations into different languages of the original Greek New Testament. And then thirdly, we have quotations. There were many Christians who, when they wrote letters, would quote from the New Testament. And we can then know, number one, that these manuscripts did exist. You can't quote from something that doesn't exist. And secondly, we can compare their quotations with the manuscripts and versions. Some of the more important Greek manuscripts are the Rylands Papyrus, and you see a number there, P52. P stands for papyrus, 52 is the order in which it came or was discovered. So P52 was the 52nd papyrus to come to the public's attention.
P66 is the Bodmer Papyrus.
And P46 is the Chester Beatty Papyrus. And then we have what's called the Big Three. These are more complete copies of both the Old and New Testament, the Vaticanus, the Sinaiticus, and the Alexandrinus. Now, as we compare the manuscript evidence for the New Testament with other ancient historical or literary sources, it's very enlightening to realize how well attested the New Testament is. For example, the Roman author Pliny, in his Natural History, which was written from 61 to 113 AD, the oldest copy we have is around 750 years later, dating to 850 AD, and there's only 7 copies. If we look at Herodotus and his histories, there's 1,300 years between when he wrote and the first actual copies we have of his books. Thucydides and his history, there's 1,300 years between his writing and the first copies, and there's only 8 copies in existence. Suetonius, who wrote a Roman historian about the Caesars, it's 800 years after he wrote that we have the first copies, and there's only 8 in existence in totality. And Tacitus, who wrote around 100 AD, we don't have any copies of his writings till 1100 AD, and there's only 20 at that point. Plato, who wrote the dialogues, there's 1,200 years between his writing and the actual copies we have, only 7 in existence. Aristotle and his works, there's 1,400 years between his writing and the actual copies that we have. 49 of those exist. And Homer, the Iliad, written in around 900 BC, first copies we have around 500 AD, 400 BC, I'm sorry, which is a period about 500 years. But when we come to the New Testament, which was written from 45 or 50 AD to around 100, only 50 years after it was written, we begin having copies. The Rylands Papyrus, which we'll see in just a few minutes, dates perhaps to 125 AD. And there's over 5,600 of these ancient Greek manuscripts or copies of the New Testament. So when we compare the New Testament and realize there are 5,600, and there's only 50 years between the earliest manuscripts and the actual copies we have. It's truly amazing how well preserved our New Testament is. As I mentioned, P52 is the 52nd papyrus found. Here's a picture of it. It dates to 125 AD. Most likely John was written around 90 AD, so this copy dates only 35 years after John was written. On the front side is John 18, 31 and 32, and on the back, John 18, 37, 38. I think it's somewhat interesting. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me, Jesus said on one side, and Pontius Pilate on the other side says, what is truth? This is the oldest fragment to date that we have, unless this next fragment could be earlier. The Magdalene Papyrus, P64, was discovered in Luxor, Egypt in 1901. And one scholar dates it to 70 to 100 AD. Not everybody agrees, but if he's correct, this would be the oldest New Testament fragment in existence. And now we come to more substantial Greek papyri. The Chester Beatty Papyri, P45, was acquired in 1930 and 31 by Sir Chester Beatty of London. It's in the museum in Dublin. There are 30 leaves now, and it dates to 25 AD. You can see in the picture there the papyrus, how it's kind of been decayed, and they made this from pressing papyrus plants together that had been cut, and they made much paper out of the papyrus plant in Egypt, and it became the primary way of recording documents in the early 1st century. In Geneva, Switzerland, the Bodmer Papyrus is located. P66, it's a nearly complete copy of the Gospel of John dating to perhaps 200 AD. 156 pages are found, and it dates anywhere from 175 to 200 AD. Another segment there of the Bodmer Papyrus, P75, contains Luke and John, and this time 102 pages of a total of what once was 144. These were also found in Egypt, and they're now in the Vatican in Rome. The Chester Beatty Papyrus, most of Paul's letters and Hebrews are found, and many of these are housed in the University of Michigan. 85 of 104 leaves are extant. These date from 175 to 225 AD. And we have in our nation's capital what are called the Freer Gospels, which date from the late 4th or early 5th century. They're acquired in 1906 by Charles Freer of Detroit. They're the 4 Gospels in the Western order of Matthew, John, Luke, and Mark. And you can see these in the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. Then we come to the big 3. The Codex Vaticanus in the Vatican, Rome. Codex means book form. For quite some time, the New Testament was contained in scroll form, but very quickly that was somewhat difficult to carry around and to find any scripture reference quickly by rolling back and forth. So they developed the Codex, the book form. The Codex Vaticanus is in Rome, in the Vatican, and has both the Old and New Testament in Greek. First few chapters of Genesis are missing, some 30 Psalms, and from Hebrews chapter 9 on is missing. Some people think this might be one of the 50 Bibles commissioned by Emperor Constantine, and this dates to around 350 AD. The other 2 of what's called the Big 3 are in the British Museum. Actually, in the British Library now, when I took these pictures, they were in the British Museum. But the Sinaiticus was found at Mount Sinai by a man named Constantine Tischendorf in 1859. He made 3 trips to St. Catherine's Monastery at the foot of traditional Mount Sinai. The first time he saw these manuscripts, one of the attendants there said they had been burning some of these papers to begin their fires with. Constantine Tischendorf, when he saw what was found there, he got so excited about that they took them from him and were not able to get them at that time. He went back later a few years and couldn't find them at all, but in 1859 he went back, and the night before he left, one of the monks there told him that he had seen some Bibles there and showed him this copy that is the Sinaiticus. Tischendorf was actually working for the Tsar of Russia, And during the Communist Revolution and soon thereafter, the regime needed money, and so they sold the Codex Sinaiticus to the British Museum for $500,000. Somewhat ironical that a communist nation would sell one of the greatest biblical treasures at that time for that sum of money. It dates again from around 350 A.D., and it contains both the Old and New Testament. The Alexandrinus, found in Egypt near Alexandria, but for perhaps 450 A.D. And as I mentioned, the Sinaiticus was found near what traditional site of Mount Sinai at St. Catherine's Monastery. The other way in which we can recreate the text of the New Testament is through early quotations. As I mentioned, often early Christians, when they would write to other people, their friends, they would quote scriptures. And from just these numbers here that I'll be sharing with you, you can see how often they quoted from the various letters and the Gospels and the Acts. Justin Martyr lived around 150 A.D., quoted from various aspects and parts of the New Testament, so that 330 references by 150 A.D. are in his writing. Irenaeus, another church father or early Christian, wrote in his letters and quoted over 1,800 different New Testament references. Clement of Alexander wrote over 2,000 in his correspondence. And Origen, over 17,000 verses, almost 18,000, are in his writings, quotations of the New Testament. Again, this shows they revered these writings, it shows they were widespread, and it showed they respected them enough to quote them in their discourses with one another. Tertullian has a great number, over 7,000 in his writings, and then Hippolytus, over 1,300, and Eusebius, over 5,000. So from just these 7 early Christian writings, from both the Gospels, Acts, Paul's letters, and the general epistles and Revelation, just these 7 people, by around the year 300 A.D., we have over 36,000 quotes from the New Testament. And they greatly assist us in recreating what the original manuscripts would say. Sir Frederick Kenyon wrote in the book entitled Our Bible and the Ancient Manuscripts, "The Christian can take the whole Bible in his hand and say without fear or hesitation that he holds in it the true Word of God, handed down without essential loss from generation to generation throughout the centuries." Now, sometimes people say, well, the Bible's full of errors and mistakes. And in a sense, that can be true, but it's not as serious as it sounds. If a mistake, a word misspelled, a word left out, a word added in, sometimes if it's copied and recopied, each time it's copied is considered a mistake, even though it originated from one of the earliest translations. And because we have so many manuscripts from so many different areas, the same mistakes are not in the same places. So we have a self-correcting system where, since you can look at so many different manuscripts, you can correct errors in each other's because they don't all have the same one in the same areas. So while it's true that sometimes people say there's lots of mistakes in the Bible, it is not true that it in any way affects the integrity or reliability because they're correctable mistakes. Sir Frederick Kenyon also wrote, when he said the interval then between the dates of the original composition and the earliest extant evidence becomes so small as to be in fact negligible, and the last foundation for any doubt that the Scriptures have come down to us substantially as they were written has now been removed. Both the authenticity and the general integrity of the books of the New Testament may be regarded as finally established. Well, that's good to know that the Bible that we trust and that we read has been confirmed to be accurate and reliable, and the mistakes are not fatal in any way, they're correctable, and so we have in our Bibles a very accurate rendition, both the Old and New Testament, to this very day. So as we talk about the reliability and inspiration of the Bible and ask the question, has the Bible been reliably translated through the many years since it was written? The answer is a resounding yes. you can trust your Bible. The manuscripts, the different Christian writings, the different versions, all confirm that we have a very accurate and trustworthy Bible.